All right, we are well into the cold season now. And the track is finished, the audio is finished. I might go in and tweak it a little bit more, but I think it's done. And that is kind of an achievement because I did say that there was this big challenge with the track, that it needs to sound fresh to my ears at least. And you know, there's a funny challenge just in trying to get music that sounds fresh to someone who's middle-aged like me, because you've heard so many cycles of things coming in and out of fashion. So to a certain extent, it's more difficult for things to sound fresh, but also your main kind of core influences are likely to be decades ago. So, you know, you're likely to lean to music that's kind of very out of date anyway. So yeah, I was kind of thinking like, am I gonna be happy with this track when it's done? But I think the key thing I've been holding on to is this idea of it needs to sound distinctive. It doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't need to be mind-blowing. I feel like when I was younger, I was much more concerned with how can I make something that's totally unique. But being totally unique is not as important to me now as actually having something interesting to say. And in order to do that, if you're messing with the form too much, the structure, the aesthetic, the whatever, if you're doing something where that's the point, that gets in the way of saying interesting things, I think. So that's kind of the trade-off. So I mentioned I had a kind of disparate array of reference tracks I was working to. There was that What's Up Danger track from the Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse film, 100 gecs, the sort of hand crushed by a mallet sound, Billie Eilish, I guess, bad guy, all the good girls got a hell sort of aesthetic, and Little Simz, who I sort of wondered, does she fit in with the kind of aesthetic of those previous ones? In a way, it was leaning more into the kind of Little Simz sound that gave me the thing that satisfied me, that this track sounds fresh. Basically, what happened was, I went back to the original track with an idea to just like pull out the floorboards and just kind of redo the whole thing. And I found myself keeping each part and being like, okay, I don't want to get rid of that yet. Maybe I'll add more stuff to it. So I wasn't changing a huge amount, but I was adding more bits and I was tidying bits up. And then my wife had another baby and that kind of squashed the bandwidth and I wasn't able to work on it for a while. And then I came back and I listened to it, and where I'd left it was I was looking for kind of new parts to add that would create some kind of sonic interest, that would do something new and kind of wild and sort of a bit left field. And it's one of these things where, because I had time to go away and then come back and listen to it fresh, it occurred to me, no, the track's kind of done, like, or at least it doesn't need new parts added. In fact, the fact that I was at a point where I was wanting to add new parts to make it sound kind of unique and unusual and, you know, whatever else, was a bit of a sign of desperation, really. That if you keep having to add new weird stuff to make it sound distinctive, for me that suggests like you're not doing it because it's serving what the kind of emotion of this track. You're doing it just to kind of sound clever. So I thought, well, what does it need? And it sort of occurred to me, no, it doesn't need new parts. It needs something that's going to tie the whole sound together. And it occurred to me, the thing that I could do is play with one of my favorite plugins, which is the sort of the Reverb Designer. Reverb, if you're not into the kind of technical music side of things, is essentially the echo of being in a room. It's like, what space is this track taking place in? And it sort of occurred to me, you know what? This track at this stage doesn't need more parts. It needs to sound like it's all in a space, and that space needs to fit the mood and it needs to be interesting. And I thought, what space should it be in? And I just felt like it should be in a small room. It should be claustrophobic. Now this is a track which is kind of expanded partly from the kind of What's Up Danger, like the orchestral sound, into having a string section and a horn section, like orchestral horn section. This is a big kind of sound. And I like the idea of it all sounding like it's in a room where you literally physically couldn't fit that many musicians. So it's kind of deliberately a contradiction. It just sounds compressed. It sounds, yeah, claustrophobic, I think was the word that sort of interested me. I started playing around with it. I thought, yeah, I kind of like the sound of that. I've just put a reverb on all of the tracks. I was like, yeah, now I'm going to go in and just like craft it on each track. And that's going to be the thing that makes it sound distinctive. And that ended up sounding a lot more like the kind of Little Simz, for example, a track like Point and Kill, which just, you know, it sounds like it's all recorded in a room, rather than, say, the Billie Eilish sound of everything is like right up against the speaker. You don't really get a sense of it happening in a space. It's kind of happening out there in like the ether, which is a great sound. It's just not what I wanted for this, as it turned out. I didn't know until I started playing around with that. I mean, I can now hear influences of all the tracks I mentioned, but not sort of in the way that I was thinking. There's the sort of electronic bass from What's Up Danger from Billie Eilish. There's the kind of graininess of 100 gecs, even though I'm not sure whether or not their sound is as much of a bit crush sound. It sounds like it's more of a playing with compression, but anyway. And then there's that room ambience and the sense of atmosphere from Little Simz. So yeah, it was a kind of long and winding road, as a man once said, but I feel like I got there in the end. I now feel like I said at the beginning, this track has kind of got a little bit of a bravado to it, I guess, of like all right, you're going to get something new. And that, as I was kind of suggesting, started to weigh on me, like this better be really new. It's not. But again, I feel like, yeah, okay, I'll tell you what. I think what it comes down to is that what I feel like now at the end of all of this, what's new for me is the sentiment of the track, capturing that frustration in a way that works, in a way that doesn't feel to me like it's cliched. And that's all it needs to do. There's lots of elements if you kind of break down the sound of the, that's a bit 90s, that's a bit 70s, that's a bit 60s. I'm fine with that because I feel like those are good tools to get those particular jobs sonically done. But yeah, now it's just the simple task of the video.